looking at you guys, I wonder who knows Hedy Lamarr and how. I think we're coming to this screening from many different places, and that's one of the things that made me so interested in this film. Some people know Hedy Lamarr for being this gorgeous woman that they saw in a film when they were a child, maybe Samson and Delilah, or Cecil B. DeMille's epic film, or Tondaleo, where she was a sex pot, or maybe even Ecstasy, where she was famously naked running around on screen. But a whole other generation might know Hedy for her scandals, for certain arrests, for becoming a recluse and a mystery. And then I think there's a generation here that really only knows her for being an inventor. How many people can say that at the end of their lives? What a crazy amount of identities to have had in one life. And I could not think as a filmmaker of any subject more interesting than that. How do you tie together these different lives this woman led and tell a story that is true in her own voice? And at first that task was impossible, and I wouldn't be standing here, except 6 months into the filmmaking process, we happened to find this incredible discovery, which was 4 tapes of Hedy Lamarr telling her own story in her own words to a reporter who had never made them public. So what you're about to see is Hedy. We threw away the film we were making before that. And what you're about to see is Hedy take the mic, better than I did, and tell the story in her own words for the first time. And I think through doing that, she redeems herself in a way she was never able to do in her lifetime. And maybe better than redeem, she explains herself, because she was a complicated woman with many, many, many different sides. But her story is really extraordinary, and I think she's a woman that we should all know about from childhood. And hopefully that will happen now. So without any further ado, I'm really thrilled to present Bombshell.
Thank you so much for this incredible film. We couldn't be more thrilled to have it here on closing night. You know, yeah. It's such an incredible piece of history, Jewish history, feminist history, technological history. I mean, you really hit so many important and meaningful issues in the film. And I wanted to start out by asking you just a few questions, and I know the audience is going to want to chime in as well. Can you talk a little bit about how the film came about to begin with, and how it related to the job that you were doing at Bloomberg, and is it at all connected? And did you want to tell the story?
I am. I'm just going to first introduce Jennifer. So this is Jennifer Hom, who starts the film and says some wonderful commentary. She was working at Google at the time, and she's also, many of you may know the Google Doodle. Jennifer is the person who came up with it, designed it, and beautifully drew it. So we're honored to have her here.
Welcome, Jennifer.
What were you saying?
The idea, how the idea came about, and how you decided that this was the story that you would tell for your first feature.
You know, there's always a personal and a public reason that you do something, right? Sometimes you don't realize the personal one right away. In the case of this feature, what I've been going around telling everyone is that I made it because I was working on stories of innovators and inventors for Bloomberg, and I was, and this is true in many ways, but not the whole story, and I was finding out that it was harder for me to find female inventors than male inventors, and people were asking me why I was covering more male inventors, and all the women I covered would say to me the same thing, which was, nobody seems to have come before us. People don't expect me to be an inventor. It's hard for me to raise money. It's hard for me as a female inventor to convince people I'm serious. So I was really puzzled by that, and I had a question in my head, which was, could it possibly be true that our whole world has been designed by people who look a certain way? And it just didn't seem that that was possible. And I thought, there's probably a lot of people out there who haven't been credited. So I was definitely looking for a story that would answer that question. And a great colleague of mine, Catherine Drew, at Reframe Pictures, gave me Hedy's Folly by Richard Rhodes, and I read it. And it was, all these light bulbs went on. But also, the personal side is that I'm only sharing here for the first time, is that that flight of Hedy's from Germany, from Vienna rather, and from Fritz Mandl, and that incredible journey on the boat where she convinces Louis B. Mayer to make her a star, was actually an escape story that my grandfather had, a very similar one. He didn't become a female movie star, obviously. But he did, in fact, escape the Nazis with 24 hours to spare. He did get on a boat and meet someone from Samuel Goldwyn's company, and he did end up becoming a producer in Hollywood. And that kind of escape, that bravado, that ability to take flight and then grasp the gold ring on the way, I mean, it just floors me that people did that. And so I was really drawn in personally as well.
And Anthony, can you tell us how you two met and why you trusted Alexandra with this very important story?
You know, I've seen this movie about a dozen times and I never tire of watching it. It's so well crafted. I mean, this movie, I just, you know, I don't watch a movie more than once or twice, but this one here, I tell you, it's just a home run. It's just packed with informative information followed by evidence. It's just wonderful. And this girl just digs and digs and digs like a dog digging for a bone. She doesn't quit. She doesn't quit. I've got like 60 boxes of archives, and just she goes through every little document, and she's still not satisfied. She still wants to hunt down what she found, which is my mother talking about her invention in her own words, which I think is nice. How we met, I just answered the phone, and there she was. And I'm so glad I answered, too.
Excellent. That was a good phone call. So, yeah, I guess another thing, you mentioned in the intro that you were on a trajectory. You had an actor that was going to be the voice of Hedy Lamarr when 6 months into the production you made the miraculous discovery of the tapes. Can you give us more about that? How did you find out about them? And then talk a little bit about how you decided in what way they would provide the structure within the film.
The tapes are one of the most miraculous things that have ever happened to me in my life. I can't explain them to this day. It was one of those things, I don't know if you've ever gotten up in the middle of the night and your heart's pounding and you know that something's missing from your work. And I knew that the film we were making about Hedy was missing her very crucial voice. And I knew it wouldn't be any good without it. And it was plaguing me. And we had called everybody who ever talked to her on the record. We had hunted down every bit of evidence at that point we could find, and still no Hedy's voice. And I was feeling really kind of desperate. And so I went back into the office and gathered everybody around me, and I said, let's go through it one more time. Let's go through the list of all the names and just give everyone one more chance. And we got down to this guy, Fleming Meeks, and we realized we had the wrong email. We had the wrong. We've been emailing him for 6 months with the wrong email. And we found the right one and wrote to him. And he called right back. And when I picked up the phone, he said, hi, this is Fleming Meeks. He said, I've been waiting 25 years for you to call me because I had the tapes. And to this day, I feel I conjured that out of thin air just through sheer desperation. So I don't know, that's just wild. And then the stranger thing is he ended up being one of my aunt's best friends. In fact, she was in his wedding party. So weird but true. And then the structure, how did that affect the structure of the film? Profoundly. So the structure of the film before was not quite so linear, and it was very much structured on the book ecstasy in me, which I really wanted to stay away from because I knew how Hedy had distanced herself from it, and I didn't know what was her and what wasn't her in the book. And so I was sort of struggling to figure out what she would have approved of and what was the real story, and structure it around that. It was a little alinear. I threw all that out and just listened to the tapes. I reconstructed the tapes, which were all over the place, and put them in a linear fashion. So if you see in the beginning, actually the story's alinear, but once the tapes start, she takes you away, and that's what I wanted her to do. I wanted her to take you away in the tapes the way she'd taken me and Fleming away when we first listened to them.
Yeah, I mean, the film is so well constructed, and I had two questions. One is, how did you balance the sort of the inspiring with the tragic, or the negative with the positive? How did you find the right place where we would be able to deal with the pain and hold on to, you know, all the amazing strength? So that's one part of it. And then balancing the emotional journey with the scientific knowledge that you really helped us to understand using all that incredible animation.
That was really hard. I'm not going to lie to you. I have had a great mentor who once told me, "Don't let your work stink of your sweat." And that is something that's hard to hear when you're a dog who likes digging for a bone. But it's hard to hear because it means you have to do an extra step, right, in your work, where you have to go back and kind of smooth over all the stuff that shows the hard work that you've been doing. And so what I really tried to do with this film was find the joy in the storytelling and follow it. And that's my truest answer. But tell me the beginning of the question again, because I've lost my train of thought.
No, I think that was just it. The balance between the tragic and the difficult material,
Yeah.
and, you know, allowing us to experience the joy and power.
Yeah.
So for us to be empowered as an audience.
Well, you know, the thing is, Hedy is an extremely complicated person, and Anthony can speak to that a little bit more. But, you know, she definitely had this dark side. She definitely was on really intense drugs for a long time. And I looked into what meth at that level does to you, and it's basically, it makes you into a schizophrenic. So she was at that point like living with a schizophrenic. And I was really aware at one point when I was making the film that part of her life was so difficult that I was distancing myself emotionally from her. And I had to go back and really rediscover who she was before this year, which I think is 1947, where she has this break. And, you know, carefully reconstruct through letters and accounts who she was before that. And then I totally fell in love with that woman. And I realized it was that woman who did the invention. There was this other woman. And I really had to be very, very truthful in constructing her before allowing her to have this psychological break, and then really being honest with everybody about what she and who she became.
Anthony, when you look at this film, what are the really beautiful memories that some of the earlier footage brings back? Because, you know, when you were children, really young children, I really got the sense of a really close and nurturing relationship, which I know later became more difficult. But does looking at this film remind you of some of those earlier times?
The film reminds me of my life with my mother and her life. She used to bounce me on her lap and sing lullabies. And how much is that doggy in the window? Whoa, the itsy bitsy spider climbed up the rain. So Hedy did all that growing up. But then we got older, and I was, I think, 5 years old when I was sent off to boarding school, and my sister and I were just dropped off at school, and my mother didn't say goodbye, and it was hard being around my mother. It was hard being her child, very hard. It had wonderful, warm, creative extremes, and then horrifying nightmares that you don't even want to know about. But it's so sad, my mother. I mean, everybody's got a cell phone in their pocket. You're connected. Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, laser-guided bombs and torpedoes, for which, I mean, so much. I mean, you're going to walk into a store 20 years from now, you're going to take what you want, you're going to leave, if there are any stores anymore, but you're going to walk into something and just take what you leave, because there's little RF radio frequencies that everybody's going to know all the inventory they have instantly. Everybody's going to know if you walk in with a cell phone, you're all right. You take what you want, you leave. It's billed to you immediately. So there's all kinds of military people wear a helmet and look at each other with binoculars in the field, and they're 50 miles apart talking to each other just like that with frequency hopping. A Mongolian rancher is going to jump on his horse and ride across the plains and hop off and go on the internet in the middle of nowhere, because there's a little dish shooting up on a mountain with frequency hopping in it, providing all these services. I mean, it goes on and on and on.
Yeah, I
Heart
mean,
monitoring.
one of the things that I noticed in the film is that, you really become an advocate for your mother, and that getting this story out is very important to you.
I when I was a little boy, I think 7 years old, we moved to Howard Lee, to Texas. And to my surprise, there wasn't cowboys and Indians, but there were buildings. But anyway, I lived in a building. And we were up in the attic, and it's like 2x4 rafters and a bulb, and my mother's Beacon storage boxes, and we're sitting on a piece of plywood, and she's sitting there, and I'm sitting there, and here's a magazine, here's this, and here's a key to the city they gave me. Oh, here's a patent. And literally, she took it out. And what's a patent? Oh, that's my invention. And then she told me about the invention. She told me and I invented swept wings on aircraft, and that I never forgot that. And that's the most important thing about my mother, is that part of her. So I pursued for the past 25 years, I guess, trying to get this top secret story told, and I'm just part of the momentum, I guess.
Well, I think this film is definitely going to get that story out there in a big way. I wanted to bring Jennifer into the equation, because you kind of represent, the present and the future of women in technology. In the film, I wanted to find out a little bit about how you met Alexandra and came into the film, and if you could talk a little bit about your Google Doodle, that would be great.
Yeah, sure. So I met Alex over email, electronic communication, because I had done a Google Doodle for Hedy Lamarr about a year before she contacted me, maybe a little bit less. Honestly, after seeing this film, I wish that your film had come out first, so it would have been a lot easier researching for my material. I'm not sure if you're the one, but I tried stalking one of Hedy's sons. Oh, no. I called a business in Florida.
Oh, no.
Okay. I was trying to do some research, not nearly as dedicated as yours, but I tried to get in touch with some of Hedy's survivor relatives. So I did this doodle because on the team, we're always trying to look for unsung heroes, basically, and oftentimes those are women who were written over in history. And I believe one of the female engineers mentioned Hedy Lamarr's name as someone who was not just an actress, but someone who contributed greatly to science and invention. And normally we do one illustration for a doodle, but I knew that I wanted to do a tribute to Hedy Lamarr in particular, and I didn't have the bandwidth on the team to do a proper homage to her for 2 years. So I had to wait 2 years until the queue cleared up, and I had several months to work on something a little bit more lengthy in her honor. So I did this like 1.5 minute animation, and lo and behold, Alex was working on a film that was way better than my 1.5 minutes, and she asked me to help contribute to it in a capacity that I couldn't at the time because I was quitting my job. But yeah, I was so honored to be brought in as a representative of someone who can read a Wikipedia page and call one phone number. But that was my involvement in the film.
Great. So, Alex, I wanted to ask you.
Say something. Before I forget, that Google Doodle of Hedy was released on her 101st birthday on November the 9th, and you did an outstanding job. Just very good. And
Don't say something. I just wanted to add to that. That Google Doodle was very groundbreaking. I mean, before that came out, I would say 20% of the people I contacted had heard of Hedy in any capacity. After that shot up globally to far, far more. So I think Jennifer's being very humble, but she did a beautiful piece of work that people really noticed. So I thought she was also a wonderful spokesperson for a generation that was becoming interested in Hedy Lamarr, including me. I'm going to lump myself in that generation. Not just as an inventor, but as this extraordinary woman who had been ignored.
From no one knowing about this a while ago to high school kids calling me, can you help me with my report on your mom? You know, about her invention. You know, so the superficial sadness, the short-term, the fanatic, I love you, Miss Lamarr. Oh, can I have your autograph? All that short-term crap. You know, that all fades away. But all this long-term stuff, it sticks around, so.
And speaking of, getting the story out and, really educating people about her in all her glory, what's next for the film?
Well, the film is slated to go to theaters, and it's going to go to theaters the day after Thanksgiving. So if you know of anyone who might be interested, please tell them.
Okay, we're going to actually open it up to the audience because I know you all probably have a lot of questions. So we've got some folks with microphones, and if you can raise your hands, we'll come and find you.
Okay, there's a question over here on the right.
We're gonna ask one and you ask the next one.
My question is, what happened to...
As far as they go.
My question is, what happened to the rest of Hedy's family? My mom was in London, and
Right.
it felt a little bit like that part of the death threat was dropped.
Yeah.
And also, was she ever divorced from her first husband? How did that work out?
Mandel. She did divorce Mandel. It took a long time, actually, and he was accused of bigamy because he got married again before the divorce was final. You can imagine how hard it was to finalize a divorce when you're fleeing the guy. But they did it. The answer about Hedy's mother is a really interesting one, and that's the one change we might still make to this film. Her mother did arrive. It took 4 years. She finally got there safely. The problem is, in the time in the film where Hedy's mother is arriving is also a time where the story's taken a completely different turn, and it was very hard to slot back in that coda that she got there safely. And their relationship actually deteriorated completely after that, because by that time Hedy was completely wrapped up in the film world. She didn't have a lot of time for her mother. It's a kind of a sad ending.
My grandmother lived with me. Basically, I took care of her with my wife the last 6 years of her life. I grew up extremely close to my grandmother, and I took care of her the last 6 years of her life, I guess.
We have a question over here on your left, down on your left.
I'm so happy you did this film. I have a friend who's an engineer, a woman, and it's still very, very difficult for women in engineering, mathematics. It's beyond difficult. It's impossible. The atmosphere of men and how they treat women in this arena is abominable, and it has not changed from the beginning. It's exactly what she experienced, women are still experiencing today. So I hope this does have some influence on men in this field or whatever. I hope it falls out in some way, and thank you so much for doing it. I had just a quick question, among many others, of where the quote came from, that beautiful quote at the end. Did she write that, or was that from someone else?
That's a great question. Firstly, hear about science and engineering changing in terms of the atmosphere for women. Secondly, yes, she didn't write the quote. It's called The Paradoxical Commandments, and it was sort of known for being on Mother Teresa's wall. And so she'd actually read a book which quoted it. And then do you want to talk about how you knew about it, how she contacted you?
Mom? Yeah. She read it too. Yeah. I mean, Mom just read it to me on the phone. And I mean, I accidentally recorded it, that part of it, or twice. I mean, I grabbed the phone and the answering machine had answered, and it just accidentally recorded. I'm very bright, you see. I recorded my mother a whole lot, you see.
Actually, I'm wondering, Jennifer, if you might talk to the experience that you've had in tech. I know you've been at Google, you're now at Uber. Do you have any words of wisdom about where we're going?
I'm not allowed to speak about. Okay, it's really interesting because I mean, women in technology, it's always been a struggle, but I don't think that it's limited to technology at all. I see it, and everyone sees it everywhere. So I think I've had the lucky experience of being treated with mostly equality throughout my career. Maybe that's just a stroke of luck, but I do see it around. And the way that we treated topics on the Doodle team was one year we decided to draw a line in the sand and say, we from now on are going to do 50% doodles for women and 50% doodles for men. And it was a struggle to do that. It was really hard to do it because we would tell the points of contact in other countries, like, listen, we need to have 50% women and 50% men. And some people would get back to us and say, we don't have that. And we're like, yes, you do. You need to find it. You need to dig. And we were proud to say that we reached that quota ever since we set out that goal. And Hedy was definitely at the top of my list when that went out. It's like, she's the one that we have to do. Because it's the fair thing to do for history and for her.
We have another question in the back left right here.
Hi, this is just a question about a very tiny little filmmaker's decision. Given that there was no necessity to show the cover of the Forbes article, I was curious about the thought process of just briefly showing but largely covering up who was on the cover of that issue.
Honestly, the decision was to cover it up with Anthony's hand, and it's incredible. With just a little wisp of his hair and his ear, people always recognize him. I did not predict that, frankly. It wasn't a decision to show him, it was a decision to cover him up.
We have another question here down on the left.
Hi, this is Anthony. This is a question for you. Your mother is obviously an amazing person, but my question is about your father and your grandfather. They have a very interesting history as well, being Irish.
Are you from Ireland?
I'm from Ireland. Do you want to tell that story to the audience?
I just went to Vienna because there was a Hedy Lamarr Special Prize to a woman, and won it, actually. She's an Italian inventor. So after it was a big deal every year on November the 9th, my mother's birthday. It's Inventor's Day in honor of my mother through all of Europe. So it's to promote invention, and it's November 9th is Inventor's Day, and my dad. Okay, right after that, we got on an airplane and hopped over to Dublin, and we recreated a photograph that my grandfather and my father were captured in on the Easter Rising, April 16th, I think, in 1916, I believe. There was a young man, Patrick Pierce, who was an intelligent lawyer who did not like the fact that England was England, the King of England needed a navy to conquer the world to get lands, but they didn't have any forests, so they invaded the north of Ireland, and they never left. They stayed in the north of Ireland, and they stayed in all of Ireland, but I think they were pushed back. So my father, Patrick Pearse, and his revolutionaries were going to fight against the whole British Army, and the weapons didn't come by a submarine, and they shouldn't have attacked, and they didn't have cell phones at the time, so it all went wrong, and my grandfather accepted the surrender of Patrick Pearse, who was in charge of the Irish Rebellion, and my father, John Loder, who married Hedy Lamarr, who divorced the year I was born. He was standing there, so I stood there where my grandfather stood. My 100 years later, 100-year anniversary, I stood where my grandfather stood. My son came, he stood where my father stood. The relative of Patrick Pearse came, stood where he stood. Nurse Elizabeth's relative came 100 years later. The photographer's relative came and recreated everything. So that's your Irish story.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question.
It's going to be in the back on your right here.
Thank you very much. First of all, I want to congratulate you on a wonderful, wonderful film, which told the story of Hedy Lamarr much more completely than a film I saw some years ago at a festival somewhere in Europe, I can't remember, in which the musical motif of Tony Martin, I think it was, singing over and over, "You Stepped Out of a Dream," to Hedy Lamarr. You probably doubtless know that film. But in it, there's a segment in which Hedy is shown living in a trailer somewhere next to a family that she befriended. The head of the family was a policeman. And it was remarkable to me that by that time she was a great star who had pulled away from Hollywood, and how open she was to this family and how much they loved her. That's not in your film.
And the question is really why, right?
Yeah.
Why aren't they in the film at the end?
Well, yeah, if you could say something about that.
Yeah. Hedy did find this little family in Florida at the end of her life. She let a handful of people into her life. Arlene Roxbury is one of them, and she's, that film you see of Hedy as an old woman, she says, the Tyrolean beauty, that's Arlene. And Chuck Stansel and his wife and daughter, they were her family. But the decision not to put that in has to do with the emotional arc at the end of the film. At that point, you're just learning that her invention has been recognized a little tiny bit, and that she does get to have legacy. And emotionally, to then go into these people that were around her, it seemed like a coda. It seemed like a distraction from that sweep upwards, where you get to realize that there's some redemption in this story. But they were really important to her, and that was a difficult decision. Do you want to add anything? You didn't miss it.
All right. I think I'm going to say this.
I have one more thing.
Okay, we have one more thing.
He was Chuck Stansel, a police officer. He kind of took my place. He took care of Mom, did her shopping, and she adopted that family. We're out of time. All right,
we're out of time, and I'm just going to add one more thing, which I like to tell people because I don't want them to think that this is the full life story of Hedy Lamarr. There is a second film on the cutting room floor about this woman. There's a second film, and I'm not even kidding. I'm not even kidding. This is a woman who was actually on the Manson murderer, Charles Manson. She was on his list. She knew that. The FBI came to her and told her she was on his list, and she had to flee California. She was one of 40 celebrities on that list. I mean, just to give you an example of one of the things that we couldn't get to in this film. She has this incredible ability to intersect history. There were other inventions that she did later in her life that we couldn't get back into. I mean, there were little things, there were dog collars and little tissue boxes and things, but she was always inventing. And I wouldn't be surprised if we don't unearth something else big as time goes on. So this was an enormously complicated woman and enormously fascinating, and I think there's much more to be told.
Okay. And on that note, if you want to hear more, we'll be on the mezzanine. So please join us for the closing night party and continue the conversation. And thank you so much for coming.
Thank you all, and vote.